Welcome to Truth in Christ, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join me for another great message. Today, we are going to be looking at the apostasy, or actually revisiting the apostasy and the falling away mentioned in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, the 3rd verse. Now, I've already done a video on this topic before where I focus specifically on how there are people out there trying to redefine apostasia, which is the Greek word for the falling away or apostasy, and they tried to redefine this word as the rapture. And the obvious motivation for that is if you look at 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, the 1st and the 3rd verse, it tells us that the coming of the Lord and our gathering unto him will not happen until there is first a falling away and the man of sin is revealed. So this is a knockout blow to pre-tribulation rapture. So they need to do something to answer this topic because this verse has led so many people to post-tribulation rapture. Pre-tribulation rapture is the only doctrine in regards to timing that cannot meet the minimum requirements of this passage. So rather than change their doctrine or try to fix their doctrine, they instead want to rewrite Scripture. In my last video, we take a look at how the Greek word apostasia is used in the New Testament and in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. Now, I won't really be focusing on that kind of stuff in this video, though I will touch on it. I would just recommend that if you want to see that and how the word is broke down, and again, I will focus on it, but not with the intensity that I did in my last video. But to see all that information in detail, I recommend watching the last video. Now, in this video, I'm going to be focusing on some of the methods that they use in order to confuse people or really try to mislead them. One of the first things that they do is they try to convince people that apostasia is used in more places than the passages in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, the 3rd verse, in Acts 21:21. Those are the only two passages in which apostasia is used, but then they try to convince people that it is used in two other places. Now let's take a look at the two passages that they claim that apostasia is being used. It's in Acts, the 12th chapter, the 10th verse, and 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, the 8th verse. In both these places, you find the word departed, and they lay these two verses out with 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, the 3rd verse, and they try to play it off like, oh, well, the word is translated as departed in these two passages, and that means that it is a rapture. It is a physical departure or a spatial departure, though you cannot find one example in all of Scripture where apostasia is used as some kind of physical departure. They try to make it appear as if they have the two verses in which it is used. However, if you look at the Greek word underlying departure here, the Greek word that departure has been translated from is aposte, and it is from apo and histemi. Now, apostasia is a completely different word, and it is from apo and stasis. But aposte means to remove, instigate to revolt, usually to desist, desert. So when we look at this word, it's not even the same word, and it has a completely different meaning from apostasia. Apostasia is a defection, apostasy, a revolt. It is the feminine as the same as apostasion, a defection from the truth. If you look at the masculine form of apostasia, apostasion, it is where you were in a marriage. You were with someone, you loved someone, and then you dissolved the union and you separated from them. Apostasia is where you're in a religion, you were a part of that religion, you regarded that religion as a truth, but then you departed from that religion. But it is not a physical or spatial departure. In fact, you will not find one instance that it is used as a physical or spatial departure in the New Testament or in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament called the Septuagint. So they're already off to a rocky start. But see, what has happened is they never show the Greek word underlying those two passages in Acts and in 2 Corinthians. And nobody questions it. I seen somebody in my comment section who actually believed that aposte in those two passages in Acts and in 2 Corinthians is apostasia. They never looked into it. And that is what they were banking on, is that nobody would look into it. And that they would just blindly follow what they were told to believe. And a lot of people have done that. But other people do their due diligence. You see, they're banking on people not being like the Bereans. Luke actually talked about the Bereans like they were great people because you know what they done? They fact-checked Paul's messages. They received his message with openness. They loved his message, but they wanted to make sure that what he was saying was actually true. So when he preached about Christ, they went back into the Old Testament and looked at the prophecies to make sure that, hey, everything that Apostle Paul was saying actually lined up with Scripture. But because people will not be good Bereans and they will not fact check or do their own homework, do their due diligence, they let things like this just slide and they blindly believe them. Okay, another thing that they try to do is they're not comparing apples to apples. I don't mean that they're just trying to pass aposte off as apostasia. I'm trying to say that they're trying to pass a verb off as a noun. Apostasia is a noun. Aposte is a verb. Aposte can indicate an actual action because it is a verb. Apostasia being a noun, and a noun in Greek is the name of a person, place, thing, or an idea. Apostasia is the name of what happens when someone is departed from a religion. It is not the act of a departure. It is the name of a specific type of departure, and this departure is a departure from religion. That is how it is always used throughout Scripture. So what they're trying to do to confuse people is they're trying to convince them that this verb, aposte, is the same as the noun. And this aposte, which can actually mean the act of departing, it can be a physical departure or a physical removal of something. They try to convince people that apostasia is the act of people being raptured. It is a physical departure. It is a verb. It is an action. However, apostasia is a noun, and this noun is the name of a departure from a religion. And this is what you call the concept of leaving a religion. It is a noun. That is how this word is used. Even apostasy in English is a noun, and apostasy comes from apostasia. The word departure or removal or anything like that does not come from apostasia. Only the word apostasy. So now, not only have they tried to convince people that two different words are the same, they've also tried to compare a noun and a verb. Apostasia being the name of a concept, which is the departure from a religion. And I'm going to break this word down again in this video. But apostasia has never, in all of Scripture, been used for a spatial departure. When I was in school and we did math problems on the board, we would have math races. One of the things that they required is that we showed our work. We had to prove that we knew how to get the answer. We knew the process of getting the answer. If I turned in my homework at the end of the day and I did a math problem and I did not show my work, I was going to get an F on that paper. And so what has happened here is someone has not showed the work. They've not shown that the two verses that we just talked about in Acts and 2 Corinthians, they didn't show the word apostasia because they couldn't. It was a completely different word, and it was a verb, whereas apostasia is a noun. And as I said, in my comment section, I've already seen an individual buy this hook, line, and sinker. I mean, that is just one individual, but it shows that this kind of deception does work on people. And the one thing that I do, and I really try hard to do on this channel, is I do try to show my work. Sometimes that makes the video a little monotonous, and I know it runs a little long. It runs at least 20 minutes or longer. Sometimes I can keep it down to 14 or 15 minutes, but sometimes they run about 20 minutes or better. But I'm trying to show the work so you can see how we come to the conclusion. And then I tell you that even though I've shown my work, go back and read the Scriptures for yourself. Go back, take this information, and look and see if it's true. And the reason for that is because I believe that this is the biblical position. I believe Scripture backs me on this. I've always been leery of people throwing out random facts or factoids and then the narrator jumping in and then trying to steer the narrative. And you see this in a lot of dispensational videos, especially the high quality ones. They give they start giving a lot of Bible in the beginning, and then you see the narrator jump in and just start telling all kinds of things that really isn't true. It's almost like watching an episode of Ancient Alien. Someone gets in there and they might be talking about something legitimate, but then the narrator jumps in, and when the narrator jumps in, he starts steering the narrative. And that's what's going on here. They're not showing their work so they can steer the narrative. Now let's get back to apostasia. And as I said before, apostasia is comprised of two different Greek words. It is apo and stasis. So the first word apo can mean a separation or a departure, and nobody's questioning that part. Thayer says that of separation, it can be a local separation. It can be departing from a place or fleeing. Of separation of a part from the whole, where of a whole some part is taken. It is also of any kind of separation of one thing from another by which the union or fellowship is dissolved. Again, apostasion, the masculine form of apostasia, which is divorce, is the dissolvement of a union. Same thing can be said for apostasy. An apostasy is the dissolvement of a religious union. It is a dissolvement of your union with God. You've turned away from God. And so the fellowship is destroyed. It can be the state of separation that is of distance, physical distance of a place, temporal, or distance of time. See, now this is what they do, and I'll point this out also when we look at stasis. A lot of people, when they translate, they don't take context into consideration. So what they do is they look down a list of things, and they pick out the item that suits their bias. And so what they'll do is they'll look at apo, and they'll say, well, a physical distance of a place, temporal distance of time. So they look at things like that, and that's what they drive home. They say, well, look at this. It says, it can be a physical departure. Regardless of how apostasia is used throughout Scripture, that's what they do. And they ignore the parts where it can be the separation of something that is like a union or a fellowship. Again, in a marriage, a person is united with their spouse, but if they get an apostasion, a divorce, they may have been once united with their spouse, loved their spouse, was with their spouse, but now they've dissolved that union with their spouse. This is a noun. Again, apostasion is a noun, and it is the name of a dissolvement of a union. It's the name of a divorce. So then we go to stasis. This is the second half of apostasia. Now, stasis can be a standing station or state, an insurrection, strife, insurrection. And stasis is a noun as well. So what they do is they ignore the insurrection and the strife part of the word. They look at a standing station or state, and they'll say, it is a departure from your standing. Now let's look at the definition of standing real quick. A standing in English can be position, status, or reputation. Okay, so in apostasion, what's the status of the marriage? What's the state of the marriage? Well, it's dissolved. It no longer exists. So apostasia can be talking about your religious standing. In fact, if we look at Emmanuel Lexicon of the New Testament, apostasia is a defection, apostasy, and a revolt. But now look what they do here. They give you some notes on apostases. Remember, apostasia is feminine, and it comes from apo and stasis. But in secular writings, apostases is, look at this, a political revolt. It's an insurrection. And apostasia comes from apo and stasis, apostases. It is speaking of a religious revolt, a religious apostasy. And in fact, they give in the Septuagint, which I showed in the last video, Joshua 22:22, 2 Chronicles 29th chapter, the 19th verse, Jeremiah 2nd chapter, 19th verse. And then in the New Testament, Acts 21:21 and 2 Thessalonians 2nd chapter, the 3rd verse, it says it's always in the sense of religious apostasy. Always. Now we've seen apostases in 3 different forms. Apostasis is a political revolt. Apostasia, which is another form of the same word, means a religious apostasy or a revolt against a religion. And apostasion, which is the masculine form, talks about the dissolvement of a marriage. So all 3 of these talks about a separation from something. And I keep saying The question that is important is a separation from what? Apostasis, separation from a political ideology. Apostasia is a separation from a religion. And apostasion is the separation from a marriage. That's the important question. A separation from what? So I want you to understand what they're doing here, what method they are using. They look at the word standing. And I'm going to go back to that word in English, but I want you to understand what they are doing. They look at that word standing. It suits their bias because they can manipulate that word. So they'll say, well, apo's a separation or departure. So it's a separation or departure from standing. So that's got to be a rapture, regardless of how this word has been used, regardless of thousands of years of etymology. Now they're telling people they've had it wrong for thousands of years. You can't do that when you translate things. You can't just pick out a word that you think you can manipulate. You can't just go with the first word that suits your bias. You've got to look at the context. You've got to look at how the word is used. You got to look at the words surrounding the word. And there's no way that this would make sense if it was a rapture. As I said in the last video, if we was to replace apostasia or apostasy with the word rapture, as they suggest we should do, we already know that the first verse talks about the coming of the Lord and our gathering unto him. So it's talking about the coming of the Lord and the rapture in the first verse. If we was to replace apostasy with rapture, it would literally read that the coming of the Lord and our gathering unto him, the rapture and the resurrection, cannot happen until the rapture comes first and the man of sin is revealed. That literally makes no sense. The rapture can't come before the rapture. This is the reason why we do not redefine words. But I digress. But now let's go back to the word standing. Now, as I said, a standing can be a position, status, or reputation. An example of that would be the standing of a community, a man of high social standing. Similes could be status, ranking, social position, or station. So we could be talking about the religious standing, a marriage state, or a political position, depending on whether we're talking about apostasia or apostasion or apostases. Now let's go back and look again at the definition of the word stasis. It says it's a standing, properly the act that is by analogy, position, existence, or by implication, a popular uprising, figuratively a controversy. Now let's look at Hebrews 9:8. We'll look at the definition of standing where it talks about properly the act that is by analogy, position, or its existence. While as the first tabernacle was yet standing. In other words, while the tabernacle still existed, while it was still around. It's talking about its state. And the status of the time was it existed. It was still around. To look at standing, station, and state. All they're talking about is a position, status, reputation, the current state that something is in. And as I gave you that example in Hebrews, the 9th chapter, the 8th verse. So when we look at apostases put together, it is actually talking about the separation from a certain status, a certain position. But ideologically, look at how easy it would be for people to manipulate these words. So if we just go back to the English definition for standing, the example that I gave was talking about your position in life, your status, your reputation. You're of a high social ranking, or maybe you're of a low social ranking, or somewhere in between. Your reputation in life, your position in life. But someone with a bias, if they needed to use this somehow to prove their beliefs, if they wanted to use the English word here, and even though the context for standing here is about your position, they would just look at the word position. They'd ignore the rest. Now, this is just the English definition for standing, but prove my point. If that's what they needed to do to take things out of context, that's what they would do. They would just go straight to the word position. Yeah, it's a removal from your position on earth, not your social status, not the state of something. But see, that's what stasis is talking about here. And I just gave the example in Hebrews, the 9th chapter, the 8th verse. It was talking about the existence of the tabernacle while it was yet standing. The standing there meant its existence, its current state. So what they try to do is they look at the definition of stasis, they look at the word standing, and they say, okay, so now we're just going to take, since apo means separation or departure, we're just going to say a separation from a physical standing on the earth. It's a spatial departure. It's not even a verb. It's a noun. And it's the name of an ideological departure. I mean, if you look at it in all of its variations, it said apostasies, the full word apostasies, means a political revolt. It's a departure from a political ideology. But when we look at apostasia, again, it's a departure from a religious ideology. So when we look at apostasion, again, the masculine form of apostasia, it's talking about the departure from the marriage state. So when we ask, what's the state of the marriage? Well, so-and-so got a divorce. So the state of the marriage is it's dissolved. There's literally no reason to give credence to the idea that this is a physical departure. But again, they look at the word standing and they just take it out of context. It is talking about a state, a position that someone or something has, a status, a standing. When you revolt from a political ideology, your standing with that political ideology no longer exists. We can't give credence to the idea that an apostasia is a rapture because it's ridiculous. It makes no sense when we look at the other variations of the same word. But now someone brought up the issue of spelling, and I want to point something out about spelling. So if we look at the spelling of apostasia in 2 Thessalonians 2nd chapter 3rd verse, it just says apostasia. But it is a noun that is nominative, feminine, and singular. So if we look at apostasia in Acts 21:21, it's called apostasian. Not to be confused with apostasion, that's masculine, that is a divorce. Apostasian is accusative. In Greek grammar, they will add a letter called nu at the end of a noun. It has an N sound. They add this letter to change a noun from nominative to accusative. Look at this. Apostasia is nominative. Apostasian is accusative. But it's the same word, both feminine, both singular, both a noun, same definition. Someone was confused and they were trying to say, oh, because it was spelt differently, it had a different meaning. No, this is just Greek grammar. This just changes the word from nominative to accusative. The same thing happens when we look at the Greek word theos, which is Greek for God. It is nominative. It's a deity, especially the supreme deity. Figuratively, a magistrate. Okay, so this is the definition. We look at theon. Again, noun accusative, masculine singular. So when we go from theos to theon, even though it's a different spelling, it's the same word. This is just Greek grammar. It's the same word, same definition. It just went from a nominative noun to an accusative noun. So what have we seen so far? Well, apostasia is only used twice in all the New Testament, and they try to convince people that it is used in more places, and they give examples where the word aposte, which is a completely different word, is used. They also try to compare nouns and verbs and try to convince people that these two words are the same. They are not. One is the name of something, a particular type of departure, and another is an actual departure or an action, because it is a verb. You see what I mean when I talk about literacy being a beautiful thing? Verbs and nouns are not the same thing, so they're not comparing apples to apples here. We looked at the different forms of apostasia. Apostases, apostasia, apostasion. All of them are a departure from something, but none of them are a physical departure. And then we look at stasis. Again, apo in Greek, it's a separation, it's a departure. Nobody's arguing against that point. It is a separation, it is a departure. Again, we're talking about separation or departure from a religion here. But stasis, they looked at the word standing in that list of definitions given there. They looked at that word standing and they were like, aha, it's a departure from a standing. It's got to be a spatial departure, even though throughout all the New Testament and all throughout the Septuagint, that Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, apostasia has never been used to be a physical departure from anything. It has always been a religious departure. Again, when we look at a manual Greek lexicon of the New Testament, that's what it says. It is a religious departure. It is an apostasy, and in every instance the word has been used throughout the Bible, it has always been an apostasy. And I really hope this video and the other video I made helps someone that they won't be deceived, because in conclusion, there is no reason to give credence to the idea that an apostasy or the apostasia is the rapture. I hope you found this video informative and edifying. And as I always say, Like, share, comment. Every interaction with this channel is going to help this channel out. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below. Turn on that notification bell and set it to all. And for other ways to support this channel, check out the link in the description box down below. God bless you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.